6 words. That's all it took. A single frustrated radio message fired into the North Atlantic night silenced the one warning that might have changed everything. The message is usually remembered as, "Shut up, I'm working Cape Race." But here's the unsettling part. Those exact words were probably never spoken. What actually happened between 2 radio operators on the night of April 14th, 1912, may be even worse than the legend. Because this isn't the story of one careless moment. It's the story of a technology designed for commerce, not survival. To understand how 6 words became the most infamous sentence in maritime history, you have to understand something most people never think about. In 1912, wireless radio on ships was barely 5 years old. It was cutting-edge technology, the equivalent of satellite internet on its first day of rollout. The equipment was massive, unreliable, and deafeningly loud. These early spark gap transmitters did not send clean signals. They blasted raw electromagnetic noise across a single shared frequency that every ship had to use. Every ship within range could hear every other ship. If one vessel was transmitting nearby while you were trying to pick up a faint signal from shore, the interference was like someone screaming in your ear while you strained to hear a whisper across the room. Wireless was everywhere on the North Atlantic by 1912, but listening was optional. Now here's the detail that changes everything about the Titanic story. The 2 wireless operators aboard the ship, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, did not work for the White Star Line. They did not answer to the captain. They were employees of the Marconi Company, a private telegraph business. Their primary job was not safety, it was sending and receiving personal messages for wealthy passengers. Birthday greetings, stock updates, dinner reservations in New York, love letters dictated to strangers for a fee per word. These telegrams were a revenue stream, and the Marconi Company expected its operators to keep that revenue flowing. On a ship like Titanic, carrying some of the wealthiest people in the world, the message backlog was relentless. And on April 14th, it was worse than usual. Titanic's transmitter had broken down the day before, leaving Phillips and Bride scrambling to repair it for hours. By the time the equipment was functional again, an entire day's worth of passenger messages had piled up, all waiting to be relayed to the shore station at Cape Race, Newfoundland. Phillips, who had barely slept, was working through the backlog as fast as he could, hunched over his equipment in a small room barely larger than a closet, tapping out Morse code 1 letter at a time while fighting to hold a weak signal across hundreds of miles of open ocean. Safety warnings from other ships were supposed to be part of the workflow, but they competed for the same frequency, the same equipment, and the same exhausted operator. Throughout the day, on April 14th, multiple vessels had sent ice warnings to Titanic. Some made it to the bridge, but one of the most critical, a message from the Mesaba warning of heavy pack ice and large icebergs directly in Titanic's path, reportedly never reached the officers on duty. It sat in the wireless room. Phillips was too overwhelmed to deliver it. The pipeline between radio room and bridge was informal, inconsistent, and on that night, broken. And the warnings kept coming. Sometime around 10:30 that evening, another ship made contact. The Californian, a smaller vessel that had stopped for the night because ice conditions were too dangerous to continue, tried to relay its position to Titanic. The Californian's sole wireless operator, a 20-year-old named Cyril Evans, wanted nearby ships to know the situation. He had been on duty since early morning, and this was one of his final messages before securing the radio for the night. But the Californian was close, dangerously close to Titanic. On those early wireless sets, proximity was a problem. When Evans began transmitting, his signal did not arrive as a polite warning. It exploded into Jack Phillips's headphones like a wall of static, drowning out the faint Cape Race signal Phillips had been fighting to maintain for hours. He was mid-transmission. Passenger messages were stacking up. His equipment had failed him once already that day. This massive burst of noise had just obliterated his connection. Phillips had been tapping Morse code for hours straight. His fingers were cramped, his ears ringing from the constant static hiss of the headset. He reacted the way any overwhelmed operator would. He sent back a sharp rebuke. The commonly quoted version is those 6 words, "Shut up, I am working Cape Race." The reality was likely even more impersonal than that. Wireless operators used shorthand codes, and Phillips probably transmitted something closer to a standard keep-out signal, a terse Morse code abbreviation that simply meant "stop transmitting, you are interfering." There was no conversation, no context, no apology or explanation, just a blast of code that told Evans to get off the frequency. Evans did exactly that. He was not offended. This was standard practice in a world where radio etiquette was still being invented. He logged off, turned off his equipment, and went to bed. The Californian's wireless room went dark. Roughly 40 minutes later, at 11:40 in the evening, Titanic struck an iceberg. And this is where the story of those 6 words turns into something far worse. Within the hour, the same wireless set that Phillips had used to wave off the Californian was now broadcasting distress signals into the darkness. Phillips hammered out CQD, the standard maritime distress call, followed by the newer SOS signal that was just beginning to see use. He transmitted Titanic's position and pleaded for immediate assistance. The messages grew more urgent as the ship settled lower into the freezing North Atlantic water. Multiple stations and ships picked up fragments of the distress calls. The Carpathia, commanded by Captain Arthur Rostron, received the signal at around 12:25 in the morning and immediately changed course. But Carpathia was nearly 58 nautical miles away. At full speed, pushing through the same ice field that had stopped the Californian, it would take hours to arrive. And the Californian sat in the darkness, close enough that her crew could see rockets arcing into the sky from Titanic's deck. Close enough that officers on watch noted a large ship's lights on the horizon that appeared to be behaving strangely. The ship seemed to be sitting at an odd angle. Her lights seemed to be flickering or disappearing one by one. The Californian's second officer reported the rockets to Captain Stanley Lord, who was resting in the chart room. Lord asked whether the rockets appeared to be company signals, the kind ships sometimes used to identify themselves to other vessels from the same line. The answer was uncertain, and so nothing happened. No one woke Evans. No one turned the radio back on. The wireless room stayed dark, and in 1912 there was no law requiring ships to staff their wireless stations around the clock. The distress signals that could have reached the Californian in seconds went unanswered from that direction for hours. By the time Evans was woken by other crew members and powered up the wireless set the following morning, it was too late. Carpathia was already on the scene, pulling survivors from lifeboats. Over 1,500 people were dead. Now, this is where the story gets complicated, and where most retellings take a shortcut. The popular version is clean and satisfying. The Californian was right there, practically within sight. If Evans had heard the distress call, Captain Stanley Lord would have steamed over and saved hundreds, maybe everyone. Both the British Wreck Commissioner's inquiry and the United States Senate inquiry placed heavy blame on Lord and his crew. The public needed a villain beyond the iceberg, and the Californian became that villain. Captain Lord was branded a coward. His reputation was destroyed. He spent decades trying to clear his name and never succeeded. But the truth is murkier. The Californian's exact position that night has been debated for over a century. In 1992, British investigators re-examined the case and concluded that the distances and sightlines were far less certain than the original inquiry suggested. The crew's accounts of what they saw were colored by hindsight and the enormous pressure of the investigations. Some analysis suggests the Californian may have been farther away than originally claimed. Others argue she was close enough to have made a difference, but that even a rapid response would have meant navigating through dense ice in total darkness, a process that could have taken an hour or more. And here is the coldest fact of all. Titanic carried enough lifeboats for roughly a third of the people aboard. Even in the most optimistic rescue scenario, even if the Californian had heard the distress call the moment it was sent, even if Captain Lord had immediately fired up his engines and navigated the ice perfectly, hundreds of people were going to die in the North Atlantic that night. The water temperature was below freezing. Survival time for anyone in the ocean was measured in minutes, not hours. The 6 words didn't sink the Titanic. An iceberg did that. But the 6 words revealed something the world had refused to see. Wireless radio, the most powerful communication technology ever put on a ship, was being treated as a commercial novelty. Operators were telegraph clerks, not safety officers. Warnings competed with stock prices for airtime. There was no requirement for round-the-clock monitoring. The entire system was held together by the good intentions of overworked young men in tiny rooms full of sparking equipment, and on the night it mattered most, good intentions were not enough. The aftermath forced the world to change. The International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, signed just 2 years after the disaster, mandated 24-hour wireless watches on all passenger vessels. The International Ice Patrol was created to monitor iceberg conditions in the North Atlantic shipping lanes, an organization that still operates today, more than a century later. Radio regulations were completely rewritten to prioritize distress signals above all other traffic. The casual, first-come, first-served chaos of early wireless was replaced with strict protocols that survive to this day. Every one of these reforms was born directly from what happened that night. Jack Phillips never saw any of it. He stayed at his wireless set, transmitting distress calls until the power failed and the ocean swallowed the radio room. He was 25 years old. Cyril Evans lived to be an old man. He spent the rest of his life carrying the weight of a moment he could not have known would matter. He followed procedure. He did his job. He went to bed. And the world never let him forget it. The 6 words that supposedly sank the Titanic were never really about one operator snapping at another. They were a symptom of something much larger, a world that had built a miracle of communication and then refused to treat it as anything more than a toy. It took 1,500 deaths in the freezing darkness to prove that the technology designed to save lives was worthless if no one was listening. And that may be the most unsettling part of the whole story. The warnings were sent. The equipment worked. Someone was always transmitting. But on the night of April 14, 1912, when it mattered more than it had ever mattered before, the one radio that needed to be on was off.